Alaya Jefferson was just 8 when her teacher snatched her notebook mid-class, accusing her of cheating on a math problem she invented. The room laughed. The answer was never even checked, but what happened next flipped the entire school system upside down and exposed a buried secret they fought hard to erase. Why was a quiet black girl's brilliance seen as a threat? Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. In the beige, humming walls of Turner Elementary, the classroom air always felt a little too stiff. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as worksheets rustled like dry leaves. Second graders filled the room with chatter, pencils tapping, sneakers scuffing against tile, all sounds that somehow made silence seem louder. And sitting at the farthest end, closest to the window that barely opened, was Alaya Jefferson, still silent and too often unseen. 8 years old, almond-skinned with tightly braided hair and soft brown eyes that rarely met anyone's gaze. Alaya was the kind of child that classrooms forgot how to teach. She wasn't disruptive. She wasn't outspoken. She didn't wave her hand or fidget or beg for attention. And because she didn't demand the room's focus, the room and the adults in it rarely gave it. But she was always watching, absorbing, calculating, thinking in ways her teachers never imagined possible. Miss Crawford, her homeroom teacher, had long since written a note in Alaya's file: too quiet, needs to engage more, possibly low confidence. It was the same comment repeated every year, a quiet judgment passed through every grade level. The label stuck to Alaya like glue, not because she wasn't capable, but because no one bothered to ask why she was quiet. They didn't see a sensitive thinker, a deep processor, or a girl shaped by her environment. They saw a silent black girl, and their assumptions did the rest. At home, the story was different. Alaya's mother, Marlene, saw the colors in her daughter's silence. She knew when Alaya was pondering, when she was troubled, when she was building worlds in her head. Their small apartment was filled with dog-eared library books, dollar store workbooks, and a whiteboard Alaya used not to play teacher, but to solve puzzles she made up herself. Marlene often found sticky notes on the fridge, with strange number patterns or shapes that looked like codes. Sometimes Alaya would whisper solutions to riddles under her breath while brushing her teeth. But outside those walls, Marlene had to fight a quiet war. She'd sat through parent-teacher conferences, where educators smiled thinly and said, "She's sweet, but very reserved," or "She's not really leadership material." Once a guidance counselor suggested they test Alaya for learning delays, not because of any behavior, but because she just doesn't speak up enough to evaluate properly. Marlene didn't argue. She took the notes, smiled politely, and walked out with her fists clenched around the truth. Her daughter was being underestimated, not because of who she was, but because of what others refused to see in her. Still, Alaya never complained. She moved through school like mist, untouched, unheard, quietly collecting every moment like a collector of secrets. In math class, she never raised her hand. Instead, she scribbled equations in the margins of her worksheets, trying to solve the advanced problems before they were taught. She noticed when the teacher offered extra help to kids who showed potential, a group that never included her. She watched as other students got gold stars for wrong answers delivered confidently, while her whispered correct ones went unnoticed. It wasn't that Alaya didn't want to speak. It was that somewhere along the way, she had learned that her voice didn't make things better. She had once spoken up in kindergarten, answering a simple subtraction problem faster than anyone. The teacher had looked surprised, almost suspicious, and double-checked the math. Then she'd smiled tightly and moved on. No praise, no sticker, just a shift in the air, like she'd done something wrong. That was when the silence began to feel safer. But inside her, the numbers never stopped flowing. Patterns danced across her mind like constellations. Equations weren't just problems, they were puzzles, challenges, even games. She once built a method to calculate the number of steps it would take to cross every hallway in the school. She solved Sudoku puzzles, meant for adults. She wrote down multiplication tables into the triple digits, just to see if she could do them backward. One afternoon in early October, something shifted. It was a typical Tuesday math lesson. Miss Crawford stood at the whiteboard explaining a word problem that most of the class was already tuned out of. The room buzzed with low chatter, some kids half listening, others doodling. The question on the board involved 2 trains leaving different stations, traveling at different speeds, the kind of problem that usually confused second graders. Miss Crawford read it aloud, her tone flat, already preparing to break it down into simpler terms. But in the corner, Alaya's eyes narrowed. Her fingers traced invisible numbers on the desk. As Miss Crawford turned to the class and asked, "So, can anyone tell me when the two trains will meet?" The silence hung like fog. A few hands went up, mostly from the usual students who were praised for their eagerness, regardless of their answers. And then, something unusual happened. From the very back, a small arm rose, slow, uncertain, like a flower opening in the dark. Miss Crawford blinked. For a moment, she didn't recognize who it was.
Yes. Alaya?
The room turned. Heads pivoted. Whispers stirred. One boy muttered, "She never talks." A girl giggled, nudging her friend. Even the teacher hesitated, brows raised as if seeing a ghost. Alaya's voice was quiet. "They'll meet in 3 hours and 20 minutes, if they keep moving at those speeds." She paused, then added, "You can subtract their distance from each other, divide by the sum of their speeds." Silence. For a few seconds, nothing moved. Then Miss Crawford glanced at her notes, double-checked the answer, and froze. It was correct. Yes," she said, clearing her throat. That's right, good job." But the tone was off. Not warm, not impressed. Almost awkward, as if she'd been caught off guard. She moved on quickly, calling on another student, and the moment passed like it had never happened. But Alaya felt something shift in her chest, not pride but something sharper. Like she'd crossed a line that wasn't supposed to be crossed. She looked down at her desk, eyes flicking toward her scribbled notes in the margin. Numbers, arrows, a quiet map to the right answer. That night at home, Marlene noticed a strange energy in her daughter. Not happy or sad, just heavier. Alaya didn't mention school. She didn't mention the trains. But after dinner, Marlene caught her daughter staring at the kitchen floor for a long time, mouthing numbers silently. Then, without a word, Alaya got up, walked to her room, and pulled a thick spiral notebook from beneath her bed. The one she'd always kept hidden. She opened it. Page after page was filled with handwritten equations, logic puzzles, diagrams, and something that looked like a new way to calculate ratios using patterns. Entire sections had titles like "Stuff I Noticed but Haven't Tested Yet," and "What If Numbers Loop Like Stories." Marlene froze at the doorway, watching. Her eyes widened as she stepped closer, slowly realizing that this wasn't just a little girl playing with numbers. Her daughter had been building a world, quietly, brilliantly, alone, and the world had no idea what was coming next. One day during math class, Alaya's hand rose slowly, and everything began to change. The classroom felt colder the next morning, though the air conditioning hadn't changed. Maybe it was the look Miss Crawford gave Alaya when she walked in. Half surprise, half hesitation. Like Alaya had broken an unspoken rule the day before. Her classmates didn't speak to her any differently, but there was something in the way they looked at her now. The boy who sat in front of her, Jesse, leaned back and whispered, "Did you cheat or something yesterday?" It wasn't mean-spirited, it was worse. It was casual, reflexive, like he couldn't imagine her being right without cheating. Alaya didn't answer. She just stared down at her desk, tracing invisible numbers across the wood with her fingertip. She remembered the problem, the way it had unfolded so clearly in her head, like gears clicking into place. But when she'd given her answer, there hadn't been any pride or curiosity on Miss Crawford's face, only discomfort. And then that dismissive smile. "Nice try," she'd said. The injustice deepened during the review session that followed. Miss Crawford went over the train problem again, this time calling on Michael, a louder student who was often praised for leadership qualities. He repeated almost word for word what Alaya had said the day before. "If you subtract the distance and divide it by the sum of the speeds, you'll get when the trains meet." Miss Crawford lit up. "Exactly. Well done, Michael. Great job explaining that so clearly." Alaya blinked. She could feel something hot rising in her chest. Not anger exactly, but something heavier, something like grief. She looked around the room to see if anyone else noticed. No one did. The other kids clapped lightly. Michael beamed. It was like she hadn't existed at all. By lunch, the laughter had started. Not directed at her, not cruel, but laced with the kind of soft ridicule that gnawed at the soul. "She talks now?" one girl whispered, giggling. Another said, "She got lucky." Jesse added, "My mom said some kids just guess real good." Alaya didn't cry. She didn't flinch. But she stopped speaking again. She watched the teachers as they walked the cafeteria aisles, laughing with the louder kids, praising the same few over and over. There was a rhythm to the attention in this school. Who got noticed, who got called on, who was assumed to be smart. It wasn't always loud. It wasn't always obvious, but it was constant. That afternoon, as the final bell rang and the children filed out into the hallways, Alaya kept her head down. Her feet were slow, dragging like something invisible was chained around her ankles. At pickup, Marlene was waiting in her usual spot, a worn novel in hand, eyes scanning the crowd until they softened at the sight of her daughter. She could tell instantly that something was wrong. In the car, Marlene asked gently, "How was school today, baby?" Alaya shrugged. "You talked to your teacher about that answer yesterday." "No," Alaya whispered. "Doesn't matter." Marlene glanced in the rearview mirror. Her daughter's eyes were locked on the window, distant, heavy with a silence that was too practiced for someone her age. That night, while Alaya showered, Marlene sat at the kitchen table, replaying everything her daughter had said, or more precisely, not said since the previous day. There was something off. A shadow she couldn't name. A silence that wasn't natural anymore. As she moved to tidy Alaya's room, Marlene reached under the bed for a sock that had rolled underneath. Her fingers brushed against cardboard. She pulled, expecting a toy box. Instead, she found a thick, spiral-bound notebook with a worn purple cover, the edges frayed, the pages bulging. She opened it. What she saw inside stopped her cold. There were pages filled with complex calculations, equations far beyond a second grader's level. Some were scribbled quickly, others carefully written out with color-coded steps. There were graphs. There were diagrams of shapes and angles and calculations of velocity. There were even invented symbols, almost like a personal math language. One section was titled "Patterns No One Noticed." Another was labeled "What the Teachers Missed." Marlene turned the pages slowly, her hands trembling. It wasn't just the brilliance of what she was seeing, it was the pain between the lines. Some pages had side notes like "Don't raise your hand, it won't matter," or "Say it out loud at home next time," and even one that read, "Mom believes me, that's enough." Marlene's breath hitched. She remembered every parent-teacher conference, every "she's just shy" comment, every moment she'd sat across from educators who failed to see what she saw in her daughter's eyes. Now she held the proof in her hands. The next morning, she walked into Turner Elementary not with a notebook, but with a mission. She requested a meeting with Miss Crawford and the principal. When they sat down, polite but patronizing, Marlene placed the notebook on the table like evidence in a trial. "She's not being challenged," Marlene said quietly. "She's being ignored." The principal glanced at Miss Crawford, who forced a smile. "We always welcome parent involvement, of course, but sometimes students mimic advanced work they see elsewhere." "She didn't mimic anything," Marlene cut in. Her voice sharpened. "I've seen her work these out on her own. She's doing algebra-level equations. At 8. Miss Crawford shuffled. "We do our best to differentiate learning in the classroom. But Alaya doesn't often speak up. Because when she does, she's dismissed." Marlene snapped. "Or worse, you credit someone else for her work. You don't reward her because she doesn't perform intelligence the way you're used to seeing it." There was a long, awkward silence. Then the principal offered a tepid response about reviewing Alaya's file for possible placement into the gifted program. But Marlene could see it in their faces. They weren't convinced. They weren't even curious. After the meeting, Miss Crawford didn't call on Alaya once. Not that day. Not the next. She acted as if nothing had happened. But something had. Because that evening, as Marlene and Alaya sat at their small dinner table, the television played in the background. A news report mentioned an upcoming statewide math competition for youth grades 3 to 5. Alaya barely reacted, but Marlene leaned forward. "You ever think about doing something like that?" she asked. Alaya shook her head. "Why not?" "They won't let me." Marlene's voice dropped. "What if we didn't ask for permission?" Alaya looked up slowly, eyes wide. That night, after brushing her teeth, she walked quietly to her room and opened a new page in her notebook. Across the top, she wrote, "Train Problem, version 2. Below it, she began drafting a puzzle of her own. A more difficult one that no one in her class would understand. One she planned to solve, in public. That night, Marlene found a scribbled notebook under Alaya's bed that revealed something astonishing. The notebook was heavier than it looked. Not in weight, but in gravity. Marlene sat at the kitchen table, late into the night, the pages spread out like sacred texts. Each line, written in her daughter's small, precise handwriting, held something unreal. Patterns that pulsed with logic, puzzles wrapped in layers of thought, problems rewritten and solved again. Not for school, but for joy. No doodles. No fluff. Just theory, hypothesis, deduction. Some of it went beyond anything Marlene had ever learned, and she had earned a business degree before becoming a single mother working double shifts. She flipped to one page and saw the heading, "If numbers danced in circles, would they make music?" Underneath, Alaya had written out a spiral graph, mapping points that looped into a Fibonacci sequence. On another page, she had listed prime numbers like puzzle pieces, attempting to predict the next with a theory Marlene couldn't follow but could feel. It wasn't mimicry. It wasn't imitation. It was pure thought. By 1 a.m., Marlene had made up her mind. The next morning she walked Alaya to school, like usual. The sidewalk was cracked and sloped, and Marlene's eyes were sharper than ever. She watched the cars pull into the school parking lot, the families that waved to teachers, the ones who looked like they already belonged. Her daughter had something bigger than this school, bigger than this system, and Marlene wasn't going to wait for permission to show the world. She took the notebook, photocopied select pages at the library, and requested a meeting with the school's academic coordinator. When she arrived, she wore her church blouse and work flats, hair slicked back into a low bun. She spoke calmly but firmly. She wrote all this herself. She began, placing the pages on the table. This isn't guesswork. These are derivations. That's what she called them. Derivations. She built her own problems, solved them in 3 different ways, then created shortcuts. She's not copying anything. She's inventing. The coordinator barely glanced at the pages. She smiled like someone handling a misunderstanding. "It's wonderful to see a parent so invested," she said. "But sometimes children copy from the internet without realizing they're doing it. They absorb things from videos, books, or games." "She doesn't use the internet unsupervised," Marlene interrupted. "She doesn't even have her own computer." "Well," the coordinator said, still smiling, "these things are always collaborative. Maybe she saw a concept somewhere and rephrased it in her own way. It's still impressive, but to formally assess her, she'd need to go through our district's gifted screening process, which only begins in the 4th grade. She's in 2nd grade, Marlene said, her tone clipped, and your teachers are already failing her." The coordinator paused. The smile faded, replaced with a flash of something else, something that looked like annoyance. "We do our best to meet every child where they are," she said coolly. "But we also have to make sure students don't get overwhelmed." "Overwhelmed?" Marlene's voice sharpened. "She's drowning in boredom. You think silence means she's behind when it means she's 10 steps ahead and waiting for someone to notice?" The room turned quiet. Still, nothing came of the meeting. No one called back. No further tests were arranged. Marlene left with the photocopies tucked under her arm, feeling like she'd spoken into a void. But she didn't give up. That night, while scrolling through her phone in bed, the only time she had to herself after putting Alaya down, Marlene saw a digital flyer circulating in a local parent group. It was an open call for the Georgia Youth Mathematics Invitational, a statewide competition open to students between grades 2 and 5. No school recommendation needed. Parents could register direct. Marlene clicked the link. There were sample problems listed on the site: advanced logic puzzles, geometry riddles, number sequences. She copied one onto a sticky note and placed it beside Alaya's breakfast the next morning. By the time she finished her toast, Alaya had solved it. Twice, with an alternate solution written in the margin. Marlene leaned against the counter and said gently, "There's a competition coming up. It's big. Statewide."
Alaya blinked. "For math?"
Marlene nodded. "You want to try it?" A long pause passed. Alaya looked back at the sticky note, then at her mother, and finally whispered, "They won't believe I did it." Marlene walked over, crouched to her daughter's level, and looked her straight in the eye. "Then let's make them believe." She registered Alaya that same afternoon, paid the $15 entry fee, submitted a scan of her school ID, uploaded 3 pages from the notebook as the optional portfolio. The confirmation email came instantly. "Welcome to the Georgia Youth Mathematics Invitational." The event was just 2 weeks away, hosted in downtown Atlanta at a prestigious prep academy. The next 2 weeks became a ritual. After school, Marlene and Alaya cleared the table and turned it into their war room. Flashcards, timed drills, YouTube tutorials on competition strategy. They worked in silence, often without speaking, their bond forming not through words but through a shared sense of purpose. Marlene never pushed. She let Alaya lead, knowing her daughter didn't need pressure. She needed room. But Marlene also noticed the shadows creeping in. Alaya's teachers remained indifferent. When Marlene mentioned the competition to Miss Crawford at pickup, the teacher nodded distractedly and said, "That's interesting. Hope it's not too much pressure." There was no curiosity, no follow-up. Worse, one afternoon as Alaya waited outside the school office, she overheard two aides talking in hushed tones. "She's the quiet one, right? The one who doesn't really participate." "Yeah, her mom's real intense, pushing her into something she probably isn't ready for." Alaya said nothing, but that night she erased an entire section of her notebook. When Marlene discovered the torn pages in the trash, she didn't say a word. Instead, she bought Alaya a brand new notebook, hardbound with thick white pages. On the front she wrote in black marker, "Your mind matters." Alaya opened to the first page and wrote, "I don't need to be loud. I just need to be right." One day before the competition, the Prep Academy released a list of registered students. There were 97 names. Alaya's was at the very bottom, not alphabetically, but as a late addition. Marlene noticed something else. A comment thread on the school's website, filled with chatter from parents and faculty. One post read, "Interesting to see a participant from Turner Elementary. Didn't know they had a gifted program." Another said, "Hopefully the standards haven't dropped." Marlene's jaw clenched, but she didn't respond. She screenshot the thread and saved it. Let them watch, she thought. Let them all watch. That same week, a statewide math competition opened registrations, and Marlene made a daring decision. The morning of the Georgia Youth Mathematics Invitational began before the sun had even risen. The city of Atlanta still wore its fog like a blanket, as Marlene dressed Alaya in a simple navy blue cardigan, gray slacks, and white sneakers. No bows, no glitter, just clean lines and quiet confidence. Her braids were freshly done, the tips tied gently with black bands. Marlene kissed the top of her daughter's head, careful not to disturb the parting, and whispered, "You ready?" Alaya didn't nod. She didn't need to. The notebook clutched in her hand was her answer. They arrived at the Carter Windsor Preparatory Academy, a sprawling private campus built like a fortress. Brick pillars, a circular driveway, well-manicured lawns. It looked like a university. SUVs and luxury sedans lined the front, doors opening to students in tailored uniforms and branded hoodies from summer math camps. Parents with sharp suits and coffee cups stood chatting, comparing academic coaches and bragging about their children's placement scores. Alaya stepped out of their 10-year-old Corolla and walked toward the entrance, eyes scanning the scene. She was the only child without an embroidered backpack or laminated folder. She clutched her notebook close to her chest like armor. Heads turned. Whispers began. The sound wasn't loud, but it was sharp, curious, skeptical, amused. "That her?" someone murmured. "The one from Turner? I heard she's 9. Barely. Why's she even here?" Marlene heard them too. She didn't respond. Her posture said everything. Back straight, shoulders firm, eyes forward. She wasn't just accompanying her daughter. She was guarding her. Her presence beside Alaya was defiant in its stillness. Inside the registration hall, the environment buzzed with energy. Volunteers handed out name tags, rule packets, and seating assignments. There was a constant humming rhythm of familiarity. Students who knew one another from previous competitions high-fived and chatted in code. "You doing the skip sequence logic set? Hope it's not another game theory round." Freeman's on the judge panel again, so expect clean proofs only. Alaya stood quietly, absorbing every detail. When she approached the registration desk, the woman behind it looked up, startled. She checked her list, then double-checked. Her voice was cheerful, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. "You must be Alana?" "Alaya," Marlene corrected, calm but firm. The woman blinked. "Of course. Sorry. We just don't usually get students from Turner." "Is it?" "Yes," Marlene replied. "Turner Elementary, District." The woman's smile faltered for a breath. "Well, welcome. Room A17 for the under 10 qualifiers. Judges will be taking notes, so remind her to speak clearly during explanations. Sometimes kids from less competitive environments struggle with that part." Marlene didn't blink. "She speaks when it matters." They made their way to room A17, a classroom with floor-to-ceiling windows and brand-new whiteboards. Students filed in, backpacks bouncing, calculators ready. The desks were arranged in rows, each with a number card. Alaya was seated. The first thing she noticed? She was the only black student in the entire room. Not just the youngest. Not just the smallest. The only one with braids. The only one from a public school, where the ceilings leaked on rainy days, and the textbook still listed Pluto as a planet. The judge entered next, a tall man with silver glasses and a clipboard. He glanced around, then settled his eyes briefly on Alaya. His brow furrowed, just a flicker. Then he looked away. The first round began. Each student received a problem packet and a blank sheet to show their work. They had 20 minutes, no calculators, no phones, no noise. Alaya's eyes scanned the first problem, then the second. She didn't flinch. Her pencil moved quickly, her brows knitting with focus. Marlene, watching through the observation window, held her breath as her daughter filled the sheet with diagrams, loops and tiny side notes like she always did at home. Halfway through, one parent live streaming the event panned across the room. The angle caught Alaya, braids falling over her shoulders, lips moving silently as she mentally walked through a sequence. In that moment, something strange happened. Alaya stopped mid-step in her solution and reached for her eraser. She wiped out an entire row of calculations, not in panic, but with conviction. Then she wrote a completely different solution path. Shorter, more elegant, using a technique that wasn't in the curriculum until 7th grade. From the back, one judge leaned forward. He stared at her paper, squinted slightly, then turned to the lead judge beside him and pointed. The camera caught it all. The erase, the new method, the subtle judge exchange, and the little girl who did it all with the poise of someone twice her age. When time was called, Alaya put down her pencil, her face calm, not proud, not shaken, just focused. The judges collected the papers. The students were led into the lounge for snacks and rest. Parents buzzed with conversation. Marlene checked her phone. Dozens of likes and comments were pouring in under the live stream video from another parent. Who is the girl in braids? Did anyone else see what she did with problem 3? She erased a full strategy and rebuilt it mid-round. That's next-level thinking. But along with awe came the shade. Looks rehearsed. Maybe her mom solved it for her. TikTok genius or just another YouTube-trained fluke. Marlene scrolled, jaw clenched. She wanted to respond. But she didn't. Not yet. Alaya returned from the break room, holding a juice box, her fingers slightly trembling. Marlene bent down, whispered, "How do you feel?" "Good," Alaya whispered. "But they didn't like that I changed it." Marlene frowned. "What do you mean?" "They looked weird when I used a different method. Like I wasn't supposed to know that." Marlene's heart tightened. "You did what you were supposed to. You trusted yourself." As they waited for the next round, a man approached them. He wore a name badge that read Dr. Hugh Barton, Judge Coordinator. His tone was polite, but there was a strain behind his words. "Hi there. Just wanted to say your daughter has a very unique style." Marlene tilted her head. "Unique how?" "Well, her logic paths aren't standard for her age. They're sophisticated, yes, but unusual. Untrained, perhaps." "Has she received any formal coaching?" "No," Marlene said. "She taught herself." Dr. Barton nodded slowly, lips pressed thin. "Interesting. We just want to ensure the work being done is the student's own." Marlene's eyes narrowed. "She's done this work in front of me every night, and she's been ignored by people who couldn't imagine she could do it. So yes, it's her own." He gave a tight smile and walked away. Marlene exhaled sharply, then turned to Alaya. "You okay?" Alaya nodded. But inside, something in her had shifted. She'd noticed the judge's looks, the way other students avoided her, the quiet ways they tried to freeze her out. Still, she stayed calm. Not because she wasn't afraid, but because she had learned that her mind was the loudest thing she had. The second round was logic puzzles. When the problems were passed out, one in particular stood out, a triangular number sequence, mixed with a misdirection designed to trip up even older kids. Alaya smiled to herself. She'd solved this exact structure in her notebook months ago. She didn't just answer it. She solved it with 2 alternate paths, writing a note beside her solution, both paths valid depending on starting assumption. Proof included. Behind the glass, one judge stopped pacing. The parent livestream caught his reaction. Eyes wide, lips parted, a gasp. During the first round, a viral moment occurred, caught accidentally on a parent's live stream. The final round of the Georgia Youth Mathematics Invitational was designed as a gauntlet, a logic puzzle so difficult that even half the 12-year-olds in the older brackets wouldn't solve it. It was the kind of challenge meant to separate the top 3 scorers from the rest, a quiet filtration system hidden behind paper and pencils. The problem appeared harmless at first, a simple sequence involving 2 trains, a triangle grid, and an ambiguous start point. But buried within was a false path, a clever trap that rewarded surface-level speed and punished deeper thinkers with second-guessing. Alaya read it once, slowly,
Then again.
and then something clicked. She didn't just understand the puzzle, she saw through it. She spotted the flaw in the framing, a misdirection designed to test whether competitors could recognize that the real solution wasn't just about calculation, but about resisting assumption. Most students would attempt to brute force the logic. Alaya chose instead to deconstruct the structure. With her pencil moving steadily, she rewrote the problem, labeling each line with her thought process. Her work was clean, deliberate. First, she identified the variables. Then she introduced a visual method, sketching a triangle grid with shaded nodes. As she mapped it out, her solution branched, 2 parallel paths, each valid depending on the interpretation of the starting data. Her proof accounted for both, showing how each led to the same final answer through 2 entirely different processes. Behind the observation glass, one of the judges leaned in so close his breath fogged the panel. Another, Dr. Barton, had stepped away to take a call and returned just in time to hear gasps from 2 colleagues. He moved toward the monitor replaying the live feed and froze. "She's not solving it," one judge whispered. "She's deconstructing it." The moment was quiet in the room itself. Alaya didn't raise her head. She simply circled her answer, underlined it once, and sat back with a breath so soft only she could hear it. Around her, students were still scribbling furiously, some erasing, others chewing pencils in panic. A few kids threw glances her way, not out of curiosity anymore, but out of disbelief. In the audience, a parent named Lydia Chen had been live streaming bits of the tournament on TikTok for her followers, most of whom were other academic moms. She hadn't paid much attention to the under 10 round, until her camera accidentally caught Alaya's board through the observation glass. Something about the calm in that small girl's face, the way she sat poised and confident in her quiet, caught Lydia's attention. She zoomed in and caught just enough of the notebook to see the twin solution logic path. Then the judges reacting. Then the room itself. She posted the 43-second clip with a caption, "Watch this quiet black girl humble a whole room full of doubters." She didn't expect it to blow up. By the time Alaya walked off the stage and into the hallway, the TikTok had already crossed 50,000 views. By the time she and Marlene reached the car, it hit 300,000. And by that evening, it exploded past 3 million. It wasn't just the brilliance of the moment. It was the contrast. The stillness of Alaya's demeanor against the rush of intellectual energy, the racial optics, the surprise, and above all the expression on the judge's face. That stunned silence of someone who had just seen a narrative fall apart. Comments flooded in. "She's not just smart. She's surgical." Notice how no one clapped until the judges looked shaken. Black excellence. Period. But not all were supportive. Underneath the praise came the rot. Trolls who called the video staged. Anonymous users accusing Marlene of feeding her answers through earpieces or coaching her using adult test banks. Theories about pre-recorded answer sheets. Comments dripping with racism, masked as skepticism. This is why math tournaments are a joke now. No way she did that at 9. Not without help. Her mom's clearly the one behind this. The next morning, Marlene opened her inbox to a message from Turner Elementary's district office. The subject line was formal, but the tone was unmistakably sharp. District review required. Immediate attendance requested. They wanted to meet. Immediately. No congratulations. No recognition. No "we saw what your daughter accomplished." Just suspicion disguised as protocol. Marlene showed Alaya the email after breakfast. "Are they mad?" Alaya asked softly. "They're scared," Marlene answered. "And people get ugly when they're scared of what they don't understand." When they arrived at the district office, they were escorted into a sterile meeting room, where 3 administrators waited, including Turner's principal and a district academic liaison. Their smiles were professional, but their energy was thick with unease. On the table sat a printed photo of Alaya's competition notebook, taken from the viral video freeze frame. "We just wanted to get ahead of things," The liaison began. Given the attention this video is getting, we thought it best to ensure academic integrity standards are being upheld. Marlene narrowed her eyes. She's 9, and you're opening with academic integrity? The principal shifted in her seat. There's been some chatter, concerns about whether the work was entirely her own. Concerns from who? Marlene cut in. Your teachers? The same ones who never noticed her ability? Or random people on the internet who can't handle a quiet black girl being smarter than their kids? The room went quiet. She wrote those solutions on the spot. Marlene continued. You can test her again. Right now, on camera. She'll do it. But you won't. Because you're not trying to verify her. You're trying to discredit her. One of the administrators, an older woman with a tight bun, leaned forward. We're not accusing anyone. We're trying to protect the district from misinformation. No, Marlene snapped. You're trying to protect a system that's not built for girls like her, that ignores them until it's too late to claim credit. The meeting ended in tension. No disciplinary action, no formal accusations, just an agreement to monitor further developments. Marlene walked out holding Alaya's hand like a lifeline, their grip tight, but the damage was already rippling. Reporters began calling the school. News stations aired the video. Some anchors praised Alaya as a math genius from the most unlikely background. Others raised valid concerns about the sudden rise of social media-made prodigies. Then came the interviews. Lydia Chen, the TikTok mom, who had posted the video, went live 2 days later to defend Alaya. She showed the raw footage. I didn't know her. I didn't stage anything. I just captured what I saw. A child who outthought the room. But not everyone believed it. One conservative commentator did a full segment titled, The Danger of Manufactured Child Geniuses, Woke Optics Over Authentic Achievement. Alaya's name was said with a sneer. The comments were worse. She'll burn out by middle school. Math genius? Or diversity stunt? Bet she can't even spell derivation. Alaya didn't see most of it. Marlene shielded her as best she could. But the energy found her anyway. At the grocery store, in whispered questions from neighbors, and in the cautious way teachers at Turner began watching her. Still, through it all, Alaya kept writing in her notebook. She started a new section titled, Proofs They Won't Understand Yet, and in one corner she wrote, This one's for them to choke on later. The school district caught wind of the video and summoned Marlene and Alaya immediately. By Monday morning, the glow of viral fame had already twisted into something colder, heavier. When Alaya walked into Turner Elementary, the hallways felt narrower, the air thicker. Her classmates stared with a strange new curiosity. Not admiration, but something that hovered between jealousy and disbelief. A few offered guarded smiles. Most just whispered. Even the teachers seemed off balance. Miss Crawford greeted her without eye contact. Her voice flat and restrained. Gone was the polite indifference. In its place was quiet suspicion. At 9:15 a.m., the principal's voice crackled through the intercom. Alaya Jefferson, please report to the main office. Alaya glanced up from her desk, eyes wide. Marlene was already in the building. She'd sensed this was coming. In the office, she sat across from Principal Langston and 2 district officials, one from the Academic Integrity Board and the other from the school legal department. Their tone was courteous, their words wrapped in policy, but their meaning was sharp-edged. We've received a number of inquiries about Alaya's performance at the math competition, Langston began. Given the nature of the attention, we believe it's appropriate to verify the authenticity of her work. Marlene kept her face neutral. Verify? As in what exactly? Well, said the academic board representative, adjusting his tie, concerns have been raised about whether Alaya completed the problems independently. There's a possibility she had prior access to the problems, or received coaching from an unregistered source. You're accusing her of cheating? Marlene asked, her voice soft but taut. No, not accusing. Just investigating. We want to ensure academic standards are upheld. Marlene leaned forward. Did you investigate the other kids who placed? The ones whose parents can afford tutors and software subscriptions? Or just a little black girl, who nobody expected to win? The room fell silent. The legal rep cleared her throat. This is about procedure. We're requesting access to Alaya's competition work, and her school performance records. We may also require a proctored reassessment. Marlene narrowed her eyes. You didn't care about her records before. When she was being ignored in class, when she was writing theories in a notebook, no one cared to look at. But now that she's being seen, you want to dissect her. She's received national attention, Langston said carefully. That means scrutiny. No, Marlene snapped. It means you're scrambling, because she didn't ask for your permission to be brilliant. That afternoon, Alaya was pulled out of recess and taken to the resource room under the guise of a routine evaluation. She was handed a problem set, one designed for 5th graders, and asked to complete it while being monitored by 2 staff members. She finished it in 20 minutes. They gave her a logic grid next. She solved it with 2 alternate proofs. One of the proctors whispered, "I don't even remember how to do this." Alaya didn't smile. When Marlene picked her up that evening, Alaya looked drained. Not tired, but stripped. "They said they wanted to see if I could do it without help," she said quietly. Marlene fought to keep her voice steady. "Did they ask anyone else to redo the work?" "No." That night, Marlene opened her laptop and wrote a post. "My daughter was ignored when she was silent. Doubted when she succeeded. Now she's being interrogated by the same institution that failed to recognize her genius. This isn't education. It's erasure." She posted it with 2 photos, one of Alaya's notebook, the other of her daughter solving problems alone in the resource room. It went viral. Again. The responses came in waves. Teachers, parents, students, and strangers chimed in. "I teach high school. This child is beyond most of my seniors. This is what systemic racism looks like. It doesn't scream. It whispers, 'She's too quiet to be real.'" But there were also more attacks. Bots flooded the thread. Trolls accused Marlene of using her daughter for fame. One anonymous account posted, "Show the full video or it didn't happen." A local news anchor requested an interview. Marlene declined. They want a digestible soundbite. This story isn't comfortable. The next morning, Turner Elementary issued a statement. "While we support all students' success, the integrity of our academic process must remain beyond reproach." No mention of Alaya's name. No recognition. Just language soaked in suspicion. But what the school didn't anticipate was that someone else had seen the notebook and understood exactly what it meant. 2 days later, Marlene received an email with a subject line that made her heart skip. "Ray Alaya's work. Please confirm authenticity." It came from a retired professor named Dr. Harold Greer, former head of the mathematics department at MIT. He had seen the TikTok clip. Then someone forwarded him Marlene's Facebook post. In the email he wrote, "The structure of her logic tree for that triangular number puzzle is not only authentic, it's original. I've only seen that type of variable reversal in postgrad level logic theory. If your daughter developed this independently, she's not just gifted. She's exceptional. I'd like to speak with you both if you're open." Marlene reread the email 3 times. Alaya was in her room, writing quietly in her new hardbound notebook. Marlene knocked softly and stepped in. "You have a message," she said. Alaya looked up. "From a professor," Marlene continued. "From MIT. Alaya blinked. "They saw my notebook?" "They saw it, and they believe it's yours." Alaya didn't smile. Not yet. She was still guarded, still hurt, but her eyes lit just enough to whisper something Marlene hadn't seen in weeks. "Hope." Marlene sat beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulder. "You did all this work quietly. But baby, your brilliance is too loud now for them to ignore." And just as she said it, another notification popped up on her phone. This time from a news editor. "Did you see what Dr. Greer posted?" Marlene clicked the link. Dr. Greer had shared a detailed thread on Twitter, breaking down Alaya's solution and validating her technique, point by point. His final tweet read, "The world is uncomfortable with genius when it doesn't come in the package it expects. But make no mistake, this girl is a mathematician, period." An unexpected email from a retired MIT professor changed everything. The air in Marlene's living room felt thick the morning. Dr. Harold Greer arrived in Georgia. The walls of their modest apartment, once filled with quiet routine, now buzzed with anticipation. The living room table had been cleared of crayons and cereal boxes, replaced with a fresh stack of Alaya's notebooks, loose paper, and sharpened pencils. Alaya sat on the couch, legs crossed, fidgeting silently. She hadn't said much all morning. Marlene tried to keep her composure. "He's just a person," she reminded herself. But that wasn't true. Harold Greer was a name with weight. An academic legend, whose published theories were referenced in Ivy League math departments. He had long retired. But when he saw the TikTok clip and reviewed the logic sequence Alaya had scribbled on that test sheet, something had stirred in him. Something rare. Something urgent. When he arrived dressed plainly in a navy blazer and khaki pants, carrying nothing but a leather-bound notebook and a worn satchel, his presence filled the room like thunderclouds before rain. Tall, white, and silver-haired, he extended a hand toward Alaya first, not Marlene. "May I see your notebook?" he asked gently. Alaya looked up, unsure, then handed it over. Dr. Greer sat down without another word, flipping through the pages slowly. His eyes scanned each line like someone reading sacred text, pausing every so often to nod or furrow his brow. When he reached the section titled Proofs They Won't Understand Yet, he exhaled audibly. He looked up. "Where did you learn this sequencing pattern?" Alaya's voice was quiet. "Nowhere." He blinked. "You created it." She nodded. He turned back to the page. "This isn't just advanced. This is elegant. There's intuition here that takes people decades to develop. You didn't just solve problems, you restructured them. You mapped symmetry across the logic. That's rare." Marlene swallowed hard, watching every word land like a breath of fresh air after months of smog. Dr. Greer leaned forward. "Do you know what this reminds me of?" Alaya shook her head. "There's a paper published in 1997, obscure journal, only a few of us even read it. It introduced a theory that most dismissed because it lacked a working model. You built the model, on your own." At 9, for the first time Marlene saw something shift in her daughter's face. Not just validation, but recognition. Someone who understood not only that she was brilliant, but how she was brilliant. Dr. Greer stayed for hours. He asked Alaya to walk through her methods. She explained quietly, piece by piece, her hands moving as she wrote and pointed. He nodded, asked questions, took notes. There was no condescension, no testing, just conversation between minds. Before leaving, he turned to Marlene. "She needs space to grow. Real space. Mentors. Support. She's operating on a level that school districts aren't equipped to handle." Marlene's jaw tightened. "We tried. They called her notebook suspicious. They wanted to retest her. Alone. Monitored." Dr. Greer's face hardened. "That's not evaluation. That's surveillance." He didn't stay for dinner. But by the time he returned to his hotel that evening, he had posted a detailed thread on Twitter. "Today I met a 9-year-old whose mind reshaped a mathematical principle I've studied for 40 years. Her name is Alaya Jefferson. Her work is real. Her methods are original. Her silence is not weakness. It's precision." The thread exploded. By morning it had been reshared by leading mathematicians, educators, and even celebrities. One physics professor from Stanford commented, "This girl isn't just ahead of her grade. She's on the frontier of mathematical thought." CNN requested an interview, then NPR, then The Washington Post. Marlene turned down most requests, but she allowed one reporter, Janelle Moore, a black journalist from Atlanta Public Radio, to spend a day with them. Janelle approached Alaya like a peer, asking questions about her process, not her trauma. The article was titled, "Quiet Brilliance, the Girl Who Solved More Than Equations." Within hours of its release, Alaya became a national symbol. Teachers around the country began using her logic diagram in classrooms. Activists tweeted her name alongside hashtags like "gifted and black" and "let her learn." But with spotlight came shadow. Fox News aired a segment that evening. A conservative host sat behind a sleek desk, eyebrows raised in mock concern. The headline below him read, "Another woke hoax. This is just the latest in a long line of viral stunts designed to make people feel good without asking real questions," he said. "We've seen this before. Some kid goes viral. We're told they're a genius. Then we find out mommy and daddy did the homework, or that it was all a setup." I'm not saying this little girl didn't solve a math problem. I'm just saying, let's not hand out PhDs for one TikTok moment. He smirked. "Remember the last time the internet crowned a child genius? Where are they now?" Marlene watched the clip alone in the kitchen, fists clenched. The comment section beneath the video was toxic. "She'll peak in 5th grade. Better mom's been prepping her like a pageant kid. Affirmative action for math competitions now." That night, Alaya found Marlene scrolling through the comments. She stood quietly in the doorway, then asked, "Is it because I'm black?" Marlene looked up, startled. Alaya stepped forward. "Would they believe me if I wasn't?" Marlene knelt beside her. "They don't doubt you because you're black. They doubt you because you're black. And brilliant. Because they're not used to seeing both at once." Alaya nodded slowly, but her eyes dropped. "I liked it better before they saw me." Marlene swallowed hard. Maybe They didn't see you before. Not really. They saw a quiet little girl and decided that meant small. Now they see your mind and it scares them. The next morning, Alaya added a new section to her notebook. Noise I didn't ask for. She didn't stop working. But she worked quieter. She smiled less. The attention kept building. Harvard's Youth Outreach Program sent an invitation. MIT's Early Access Summer Lab asked for her application. Stanford offered to fly her out for a weekend seminar. But Turner Elementary? They issued no statement. No email. No congratulations. They simply stayed silent. And while the world sang her praises, Alaya learned a bitter truth. Sometimes the worst damage isn't loud or violent. It's the silence of institutions that pretend you don't exist once you no longer fit their comfort zone. A prominent conservative talk show host aired a segment titled "Another Woke Hoax." The viral spotlight that once illuminated Alaya's brilliance soon twisted into a heat lamp that scorched everything around her. In the beginning, the interviews, articles, and academic endorsements had given Marlene a quiet sense of triumph. The world was finally seeing what she had always known. Her daughter wasn't just intelligent, she was extraordinary. But that light, as bright as it burned, drew shadows that neither of them were prepared for. 3 days after the Fox News segment aired, Marlene came home from the grocery store to find an envelope tucked beneath the front door. No return address. No postage. Just her name, scrawled in red marker. Inside was a single sheet of paper, printed in bold font. "We know where you live. Keep that girl quiet." Her hands trembled as she folded it back up, her eyes darting toward the window. Alaya was in the living room, headphones on, working through a new sequence involving non-linear systems. She had no idea that danger had just slipped quietly into their mailbox. Marlene didn't sleep that night. At 3 a.m., she opened her laptop and found something worse. Their home address had been posted in a far-right forum, under a thread titled, "Exposing the Math Hoax." Commenters speculated that Marlene was an activist using her daughter for clout. Others accused her of manipulating the narrative for black victim points. One user wrote, "Wouldn't be surprised if she forged the notebook herself. Kid probably can't even spell." A few were less subtle. "Burn it all down." Marlene called the police the next morning, her voice tight with fear. The responding officer, a young man with gelled hair and mirrored sunglasses, stood in their doorway with a notepad and an unsettling calm. "Well, no actual threat here," he said after reading the letter. "No direct mention of violence. Could be kids messing around." "It was slipped under my door," Marlene said, "and our address was leaked. Nothing actionable yet. But I can file a report if it makes you feel better." She stared at him. "Feel better?" He shrugged. "Look, best advice I can give. Keep things low profile. Internet forgets fast. Don't feed the fire." Marlene slammed the door the moment he left. That weekend, another envelope came. This one contained clippings from online forums, screen captures of death threats, comments calling for someone to shut her up. One particularly vile post suggested that math prodigies from public housing were part of a liberal grooming agenda. The racism was no longer coded. It was blatant. Marlene pulled Alaya out of school the next Monday. She didn't wait for Turner Elementary to protect her daughter. She didn't trust the system that once ignored her genius to now safeguard her safety. With no formal announcement, no call to the district, she simply stopped sending Alaya to class. She informed the administration through a single-sentence email. "Effective immediately, I will be homeschooling Alaya for safety reasons." There was no reply. The apartment transformed into a fortress. Windows stayed covered. The buzzer was disabled. Marlene installed a camera at the entrance using a gift card sent anonymously by a supporter. Friends stopped visiting. Neighbors whispered. The silence inside the home was now layered. Not peaceful, but defensive. Alaya, however, did not retreat. Isolation didn't make her shrink. It sharpened her. Freed from the limitations of school worksheets and distracted classrooms, she bloomed in the stillness. Marlene structured lessons loosely, focusing on real-world problems. Alaya tore through algebra, then geometry, then introductory calculus. She created visual graphs using string, pins, and cardboard. She built a game where equations controlled movement, then rewrote the logic behind it when she realized the system had an inefficiency. She titled the game Quiet Logic. But even as her skills evolved, something inside her hardened. She spoke less. Not from fear, but from clarity. The noise outside the apartment walls had taught her a brutal lesson. The world didn't love brilliance unless it came in a form it was comfortable with. Marlene tried to restore joy. They cooked together, watched old movies, created math scavenger hunts through their building. But there were days when Alaya stared at her whiteboard in silence, the marker in her hand frozen mid-air. On one of those days, Marlene asked, "What are you thinking about?" Alaya answered without looking up. "If they hate what they don't understand, maybe I have to become something they can't explain." The word stayed with Marlene like an echo. Her daughter wasn't seeking approval anymore. She was building something bigger, armor made of logic, resilience written in algorithm. Outside their world, the noise continued. A podcast episode called Her a Media Fabrication. A guest on a news panel laughed at the idea that a 9-year-old girl could outthink trained professionals. A YouTuber with millions of subscribers uploaded a video titled, "Debunking the Black Girl Genius Myth." It had over 500,000 views. Marlene stopped trying to keep up. The war for public perception wasn't her battle anymore. Her only job was to protect the mind inside her home. Then one morning in early spring, the email arrived. The subject line read, "National STEM Futures Initiative, Special Invitation for Alaya Jefferson." It was from the Department of Education's Research and Innovation Division. The email explained that Alaya's name had been submitted by multiple professors and researchers, including Dr. Harold Greer. They were extending an invitation for her to join a youth think tank in Washington, D.C., a year-long program designed for the top 0.01% of minds in the country. There would be mentorships, labs, research access, full funding, travel included. Marlene stared at the screen in disbelief. Below the offer was a personal note, handwritten and scanned by one of the coordinators. "We've never had a candidate this young, or this fearless. We'd be honored to have her." When Marlene called Alaya into the room and read her the letter, her daughter didn't smile immediately. Instead, she asked, "Do I have to speak?" Marlene hesitated. "Eventually, but only when you're ready." Alaya took the letter, read it quietly, then said, "If I go, can I ask them questions too?" Marlene blinked. "What kind of questions?" Alaya looked up. "The kind that make them uncomfortable." Marlene felt a flicker of pride that ran so deep it ached. "Then baby," she whispered, "pack your notebook." Months later, Alaya received an invitation to a national think tank in Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. greeted Alaya with gray skies and marble buildings that seemed to stretch into history. The city was a monument to power, and the air around the National Youth Science and Math Summit felt like it knew that. Everything was curated, from the polished stone steps of the conference center to the security guards with discreet earpieces and the thick, glossy badges handed out at registration. Even brilliance here came with structure and protocol. Alaya, now 10, stepped quietly through the entrance of the hall, her notebook hugged tight to her chest. Marlene walked beside her, scanning the crowd with protective eyes. Around them, clusters of students moved confidently through the corridors, mostly white, a few Asian, none black. Most wore name tags with prep school logos or mentored by labels, as if affiliation was a form of proof. The buzz was constant, talk of grants, math Olympiads, summer intensives. It was less about discovery and more about pedigree. The registration volunteer blinked twice when Alaya stepped forward. "Oh, you must be with the volunteer program," she asked, reaching for the staff clipboard. "No," Marlene replied flatly. "She's one of the presenters." The woman's eyes widened. She flipped through the list again, and finally found Alaya's name, scribbled near the bottom. "Right, sorry, just wasn't expecting someone her age." Marlene's silence said everything. They were ushered into a preparation room, where other students ran through slides on laptops and compared formulas. No one spoke to Alaya. A few glanced over, eyes lingering on her braids, her small frame, her silent posture. Someone whispered, "Is she someone's little sister?" Alaya heard it. She always did. Later at the opening session, the keynote speaker, a Stanford physicist with a booming voice and polished shoes, welcomed the young innovators of tomorrow. He congratulated the students on being the best and brightest, but when he listed the top schools represented, Turner Elementary was not among them. He paused once, squinting into the audience and saying, "We've even got a brave young girl from Georgia, I believe. Hope she enjoys the experience." Alaya didn't flinch. She'd heard condescension in all its disguises. Over the next 2 days, she attended breakout panels and workshops, quietly observing. In one workshop on pattern theory, the speaker ignored her raised hand twice before calling on a boy from Connecticut. who repeated her unspoken solution word for word. In another session, a group of teen boys asked her if she needed help finding her group. When she said she was in it, one muttered, "Even the organizers got her name wrong on the group badge, Alaya Jefferson." Still, Alaya took notes, not just on math, but on how rooms shifted, who was listened to, who was interrupted, which theories earned applause, and which were deemed interesting but undeveloped. She wrote down the names of the gatekeepers, the ones with microphones, the ones with the keys. Then on the third day, it was her turn to present. Her assigned room was small, not one of the main auditoriums. The schedule listed her under emerging theories, a polite way to minimize expectations. A few people wandered in out of curiosity. Most were there for the next speaker, a high schooler with connections to Caltech. Alaya stood at the podium, adjusted the microphone, and quietly clicked to her first slide. No title, just an equation across the top. "This is a theorem I've been working on for 10 months, she said, voice steady. "It's a method for identifying hidden symmetry in number sequences that appear random." Some heads lifted. She clicked again. A visual model appeared, something that looked like a series of nested spirals overlaid with colored nodes. "I found that certain irrational sequences loop back through mirrored subsets if you shift the base by prime intervals. It creates a new kind of symmetry, not visible in standard representation, but detectable if you use a trinary grid." Now the room was silent. She moved to the whiteboard and began sketching. She didn't just show the solution, she revealed the process. She explained the failures, the recalculations. The moment she realized the spiral wasn't closing, it was echoing. Her hands moved fast, but her words were clear, not loud, not flashy, just precise. By the time she clicked to her final slide, a live demo using her hand-coded visualization, the judges in the back row had leaned forward in their seats. No one clapped. Not yet, because they were too stunned. One judge, a former Harvard fellow, stood and approached the board, examining the final graph like it was a sculpture. "This sequence, it's not published. I've never seen this model." Alaya nodded once. "It's mine." "Who coached you?" he asked. "No one." He stared at her, then turned to the room. "You need to understand, this isn't just advanced, this is new, this is discovery." That's when the clapping began. Quiet at first, then rising. Cameras clicked, phones came out. A student from MIT asked for her GitHub. A Columbia recruiter handed her a card and said, "We need to talk soon." The room, once indifferent, now orbited around her. Outside the door, a woman in a tailored suit stood waiting. The Harvard recruiter. She approached Marlene with an extended hand. "I'm Dana Shears. I run Harvard's Young Scholars Pipeline. Your daughter has something we don't see often. Not just talent, vision." Marlene exhaled. She wanted to be happy, to feel proud, but all she could think about was how that same brilliance had once been called suspicious, how her daughter's silence had been used as an excuse to overlook her, and how only now, under lights and applause, they believed. Alaya exited the room quietly, notebook back in hand. Marlene knelt beside her. "How do you feel?" Alaya shrugged. "Same." Even with all that attention, Alaya looked up. They listened, but not until I gave them something they couldn't ignore. Later that night, a snippet of her presentation, just 2 minutes long, was uploaded by a conference attendee on Twitter. The caption read, "10-year-old black girl just presented a theorem no one's ever seen before. Genius isn't loud, it's real." By morning it had over 5 million views. And by lunchtime, the backlash arrived, again. This time it didn't come from strangers on the internet. It came from within the conference itself. A parent, mother of one of the teen boys who had also presented that day, filed a formal complaint with the summit's board. She claimed Alaya's theorem had been pre-fed by adults, and that the presentation clearly exceeded what should be possible at that age level, without external influence. The wording was passive-aggressive, wrapped in just raising concerns language, but the intent was clear. Gatekeeping in a new disguise. A judge forwarded the complaint to Marlene, with a brief note, "Required to notify you as part of procedure. We do not endorse the claim." Marlene closed her laptop slowly. Alaya sat across the table, working through another proof. She didn't know yet. Marlene watched her daughter's pencil glide across the paper, then looked out the hotel window at the city that had both crowned and questioned her. The presentation went viral. Again, But this time, a jealous parent filed a formal complaint. It began with a headline: subtle, slanted, sinister. Too smart to be true? Questions swirl around viral math prodigy. One article turned into a swarm. Within 24 hours of the formal complaint being filed, media outlets began feeding on the story like vultures circling something wounded, but not yet dead. The accusation was crafted to create doubt, not to prove guilt. And it worked. The mother's wording had been calculated. It appears the material may closely resemble work found in academic journals not accessible to someone of her age or training. That's all it took. Alaya's name was now splashed across blogs, opinion pages, and talking head panels under the polite cover of concern. They weren't calling her a fraud outright. Not yet. But they were asking questions. Dangerous, deliberate questions. Is this another example of overzealous parenting? Could this be a case of adult interference in youth competitions? Have we rushed to celebrate a narrative that was too perfect to be real? By the second day, her photo, the one of her standing beside her whiteboard, with a soft, uncertain smile, was being used on thumbnails with headlines like "Genius" or "Ghostwriter." Marlene didn't sleep that week. Emails flooded in. Not just from strangers, but from schools and programs that had once praised Alaya with glowing language. Suddenly, those same institutions were pausing all further conversations pending investigation. One by one, her scholarship offers were suspended. MIT's summer lab rescinded its invite. Harvard's youth program sent a cold copy-paste email. We regret that under current scrutiny, we must delay any further engagement. The message was clear. Her brilliance was conditional. Their support was performative. And the second she became inconvenient, she was discarded. Marlene tried to keep Alaya shielded from it all, but the cracks were impossible to patch. The little girl who once filled notebooks with theories now stared at blank pages, pencil unmoving. She stopped eating. She said she wasn't hungry. But it wasn't about food. It was about erasure. One night, Marlene sat beside her on the couch, arms wrapped around her daughter's thin shoulders. "You are not what they say," she whispered. "You are not the lie they're building." Alaya's voice came out as a whisper, broken and raw. "They think you wrote it." "I know." The question landed like a slap, but Marlene didn't flinch. She turned to her daughter and looked her in the eye.
"No, I didn't. I couldn't have if I tried. That's your mind, Alaya."
And they're scared of it, because it doesn't look like what they're used to. Alaya nodded, but her eyes were empty. The days blurred. Reporters showed up outside their building. Neighbors started avoiding them. One teacher from Turner Elementary anonymously leaked a quote to a local outlet, stating that Alaya rarely demonstrated gifted behavior in class, feeding the doubt like gasoline to flame. Marlene was served a notice. A legal representative from a consortium of prep schools and competition sponsors demanded proof of authorship for all of Alaya's work submitted over the past year. Buried in the letter was the threat of fraudulent misrepresentation, suggesting that Marlene may have violated academic ethics on behalf of her daughter. The pressure mounted. And then came the lowest blow. An email from the Georgia Department of Education. They were launching a formal review. All district support programs for Alaya would be frozen, pending the outcome. She was 10 years old. That night, Marlene sat at the kitchen table surrounded by folders, printouts, and correspondence. Her hands shook as she flipped through old worksheets, competition entries, scanned notebook pages. Nothing felt like it would ever be enough. Because this wasn't about the truth. It was about power. They were betting she'd break, that she'd quietly vanish from the headlines, and they'd never have to reckon with the fact that they'd doubted genius again. Then, on a Wednesday afternoon, just as Marlene was about to call a civil rights attorney for advice she couldn't afford, an email landed in her inbox with the subject line, "I saw everything. I need to talk." No signature. No name. Attached was a document, a screenshot of an internal message board for parents of summit participants. It was buried in a subfolder, accessible only to premium tier members of a private online group. The post had been deleted, but not before someone saved it. It read, "Let's be real. If this girl was white, no one would be questioning it. But since she's not, we're expected to believe she invented something the Harvard guys couldn't even name. This story is embarrassing. If no one else is going to say something, I will." The user's profile picture had been redacted, but the fine of the screenshot wasn't. Taboo Carlton upload. Marlene's breath caught in her throat. Carlton. The same last name as the mother who filed the original complaint. She stared at the image, the bile rising in her chest. Then another email came. This one from the same anonymous sender. They never believed in her. They just wanted to stop her. I worked IT for the summit's back-end system. I saw the logs. The complaint wasn't based on any evidence. They had an email chain joking about how quickly the woke media would eat it up. Attached was a .seep file. Inside, 3 emails between summit board members, discussing how to manage the optics of a potential credibility scandal, not because they had any proof of misconduct, but because they were afraid of being too politically correct again. One email included a suggestion to let a parent raise the issue. Keeps our hands clean. Marlene printed everything. She reached out to a journalist she trusted, Janelle Moore, the same one who had interviewed them months before. This time there was no profile piece. It was a full investigative report. Moore published the exposé 2 days later, under the title, Engineered Doubt, How Institutions Manufacture Scandal to Silence Black Genius. The article dropped like a thunderclap. Screenshots, testimonies, expert quotes. Greer himself went on record, defending Alaya and denouncing the board. Harvard retracted their suspension. MIT issued a public apology. Even the Department of Education opened a review into the summit's leadership.
The mother who filed the complaint.
She released a vague statement about miscommunication and deactivated her accounts. But the damage was done. Alaya saw the article. Read every word. That night, for the first time in weeks, she picked up her pencil and wrote a new equation on her whiteboard. At the bottom, she signed it. Solution: survive the proof they demand, then rewrite the question. A surprise confession from a whistleblower exposed a deliberate conspiracy. The air in the Jefferson apartment buzzed like static the day the whistleblower's second package arrived. It came not through email this time, but in a thick yellow envelope hand-delivered by a courier. No return address. No note. Just the words "for the record," written in black ink, across the top. Marlene's hands shook slightly as she opened it. Inside was a USB drive. She locked the door behind her, sat at the kitchen table, and plugged it into her laptop. What appeared on screen sent a chill down her spine. A folder labeled Confidential, District Ops, opened to reveal dozens of internal emails, meeting summaries and flagged memos, all from the school board, dating back months. Many involved familiar names: Principal Langston, the district academic coordinator, members of Turner Elementary's Parent Advisory Council. The tone wasn't neutral. One email, sent just 2 days after Alaya's viral moment at the math competition, read, "We need to get ahead of this narrative before it makes us look like we missed something big." Another, more pointed, came from a board member. "If this story grows legs, people will start digging into how we've handled Black exceptionalism in the past. And that is not a conversation we're prepared to have." But the one that hit Marlene like a gut punch was an internal chain marked with the subject line, "Quiet Problem." Inside, board members debated how to frame Alaya's case in a way that cast doubt without appearing overtly discriminatory. Phrases like plausible skepticism, questions of authorship, and strategic reframing to avoid narrative dominance were tossed around like policy tools. One member even suggested leveraging external concern from competitive parents as cover to open a district-level review, the very review that had nearly destroyed Alaya's future. Marlene sat back, her pulse roaring in her ears. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't cautious protocol. It was conspiracy. They had seen her daughter's mind, and instead of protecting it, they moved to bury it. She knew this wasn't just about Alaya. It was about every brilliant Black child who'd ever been dismissed, doubted, or diminished by a system that only recognized excellence when it came in packages they were comfortable with. Within hours, she contacted Janelle Moore again. The journalist arrived at their door the next day, her voice low but her eyes fierce. "Are you sure you want to go public with this?" Marlene didn't hesitate. "I don't want to. I need to." Moore's next article wasn't just investigative, it was incendiary. The Quiet Problem, How School Boards Systematically Undermine Black Gifted Students, ran on the front page of 3 major publications. The emails were published in full, names unredacted. The implications were explosive. Proof that institutions weren't just failing to support students like Alaya, they were actively working to erase them. The backlash was immediate. Educators across the country flooded forums with outrage. Civil rights organizations issued statements demanding accountability. Former students of Turner Elementary came forward with their own stories of being skipped over, silenced or told to focus on behavior before brilliance. Some were now adults, with degrees and scars alike, and they flooded the internet with the hashtag, "We were quiet too." In Atlanta, protests began outside the district office. What started as a dozen parents grew into hundreds, then thousands. News crews set up camp on the sidewalk. National commentators picked up the story. The Jeffersons' once silent apartment became the epicenter of a cultural reckoning. At a city council meeting, an activist read one of the emails aloud. "We can't let this become a symbol." Then she looked directly at the cameras and said, "Too late." Still, amid the media storm, Marlene remained focused on one thing: protecting her daughter. Alaya watched it all unfold, half aware, half detached. She heard her name on the news, saw her photo on flyers. Her whiteboard was still filled with equations, but now there were words on the wall beside it. Printed headlines Marlene had pinned like battle scars. One night, Alaya asked, "Do I have to become the symbol they're scared of?" Marlene paused. "You don't have to become anything they want you to be. But you've already become more than they ever expected." Then came the legal summons. Civil rights attorneys, backed by 2 advocacy organizations and a pro bono legal team, filed a lawsuit against the school district. The charges were sweeping: discrimination, defamation, abuse of process, and intentional emotional distress. Marlene was named as lead plaintiff. Alaya, as key witness. It hit differently than a headline. It felt real, tangible, heavy. The first court appearance was scheduled for late spring. Alaya would have to testify, not just about her math, but about how she had been treated, how she had been made to feel small for being brilliant, how her silence had been weaponized against her. In the days leading up to the hearing, she practiced with a counselor, her attorney, and Marlene. She was steady but quiet. Her words were soft, but her gaze was unshaken. She described being ignored, accused, erased, not with anger, but with clarity. On the night before the testimony, Marlene sat with her in bed. Alaya was still awake, eyes wide. "Are you scared?" Marlene asked.
Yes.
"Do you want to stop?" "No," Alaya said, then whispered, "I want them to hear what silence sounds like when it finally speaks." Marlene kissed her forehead. "Then speak, baby, not just for you, but for every girl they tried to silence." By morning, the courthouse steps were flooded with supporters: educators, students, parents, protesters, news vans, banners. The same judge who once dismissed similar claims now sat stone-faced behind the bench as Alaya entered the courtroom, holding her mother's hand and wearing her navy blue cardigan like armor. A major lawsuit was filed, and Alaya was scheduled to testify. The courtroom was colder than Alaya expected. Not the kind of cold that came from air conditioning, but the sterile chill of polished floors, heavy oak doors, and the unblinking stares of people who thought truth could be measured in volume. She sat in the front row next to Marlene, dressed in a navy blue blazer and dark jeans, the Thale outfit she wore the day she presented her theorem in D.C. Now pressed and reworn like armor, her braids were tied back into a low ponytail, simple, controlled. Across the aisle, the school district's attorney sat stiffly with folders stacked high, eyes darting from paper to screen. Their faces were unreadable, polished expressions trained in 100 depositions. But underneath their silence was tension. They had walked into this building prepared to fight an accusation. What they didn't expect was a testimony. The judge, a black woman with graying curls and steel in her voice, called the case into session at exactly 9. "This is not a trial about whether a student is gifted," she said in her opening remarks. "It's a trial about what systems do when that gift comes from a source they didn't anticipate, and what they do to erase it when they feel threatened." Every seat in the gallery was filled: educators, parents, former students, and reporters. Some held notepads, some held their breath. Then they called Alaya to the stand. She stood slowly, her shoes quiet on the floor, her shoulders squared despite the weight of every camera, every gaze, every expectation. The court clerk swore her in. She nodded once, hands steady at her sides. Her attorney approached, voice low and warm. "Alaya, can you tell the court what you love about math?" Alaya paused, then answered, "It doesn't ask what color you are." The room went still. She continued, "It doesn't care how loud you talk. It only cares if it's true. Numbers don't get uncomfortable. Did anyone help you create the theorem you presented in D.C.? "No," she said. "I built it at home, in my notebook, over 10 months. Why didn't you tell your teachers? She looked down for a moment. Because they didn't ask. And when I did speak, they didn't listen. Her voice never cracked. She didn't cry. She didn't rush. She spoke in the rhythm of someone who had learned to be exact because the world would measure her words like proof. She explained the sequences she used, her logic tree, the early versions that failed, and how she revised them. She described the moment at Turner Elementary, when she solved a train problem, and was dismissed with a nice try, only to watch her answer be praised moments later when repeated by a classmate. She recounted the meeting with the principal where her notebook was brushed off as possibly not her own work. When asked how the accusations made her feel, she replied, like being smart wasn't allowed, unless someone else approved of how I looked doing it. The jury, 7 women, 5 men, sat frozen. Some scribbled notes. One woman, visibly blinked back tears. But it wasn't just Alaya's voice that echoed in the courtroom. Over the next 3 days, witnesses were called who painted a damning portrait of institutional failure. Dr. Harold Greer testified via video. Alaya didn't just replicate advanced theory. She extended it. Her work is independently verifiable. And her logic is her own. I've published for 40 years, and I've never seen intuition like this in someone her age. Janelle Moore, the journalist, read excerpts from the school board emails. They didn't deny her work. They feared its implications. They didn't say she was wrong. They said she was inconvenient. And then came the testimony that shattered the defense. A former Turner Elementary teacher, Miss Sorrells, who had quietly resigned 2 months prior, took the stand with shaking hands. I was in the room when the district first saw the video, she said. They didn't question its authenticity because it looked fake. They questioned it because it didn't look like the kind of student they'd invested in. Because she was quiet, because she was black, and because they'd never once marked her as exceptional. She paused, voice trembling. We weren't trained to spot brilliance in students like Alaya. We were trained to manage them. The defense team tried to recover. They pointed to standard protocol, claimed they had every right to ensure fairness in academic competition. But the courtroom wasn't listening anymore. Not really, because the truth had already settled into the cracks. When Marlene took the stand, her testimony wasn't legalistic. It was maternal, honest, furious in its restraint. I watched my child be questioned, erased, and vilified for daring to be better than what they imagined was possible. And when she didn't shrink, they made her a target. She looked toward the jury. My daughter never needed their permission. She needed their protection. By the end of the week, closing arguments were a formality. The verdict came swiftly, unanimous. The court found that the school district had engaged in willful discrimination, knowingly attempted to discredit a student due to racial bias, and participated in a deliberate attempt to manage public perception instead of correcting injustice. The judge awarded Marlene and Alaya financial damages, along with a legally binding order for the school district to restructure its gifted assessment protocols within 6 months. But the money was never the point. As the courtroom emptied and reporters gathered outside, the media descended on Alaya again. Microphones, cameras, a dozen questions at once. She stepped forward, lifted her chin, and spoke into the chaos. And then she walked away, notebook in hand, as the world fell utterly, completely silent, and then exploded. As the cameras rolled, Alaya made one quiet but unforgettable statement. The quote echoed far beyond the courtroom. They tried to measure me by volume, not value. Alaya hadn't planned it. It wasn't rehearsed. It slipped out in the swirl of camera flashes, the onslaught of questions, the moment when everyone leaned in, expecting a soundbite, and got something more. But once spoken, it spread like fire across a dry field of silence that had existed in schools, staff rooms, and policy boards for decades. It showed up on posters taped to the walls of public schools in Chicago, in tweets by black educators in Texas, in a hand-painted mural in Oakland that depicted Alaya standing in front of a chalkboard, filled with swirling algorithms. Activists turned the line into a rally cry. Parents emailed principals. Teachers paused their lessons to ask themselves why their class participation rubrics rewarded confidence over content. A black mother in Baltimore stitched the words into a pillow for her daughter. News outlets who once hesitated to cover Alaya now scrambled to book interviews. Talk shows requested appearances. Publishers made offers. Universities that once held her application under review now extended full-ride scholarships and lab placements. Even international organizations reached out. One from South Africa invited her to a youth STEM summit. Another from Norway asked her to mentor a digital math camp. But amid the noise, Alaya didn't bask. She built. While others debated her place in the academic landscape, she quietly crafted something bigger. Something that would make space for others like her. Girls who whispered answers but were never called on. Girls who aced the test but were told to show more enthusiasm. Girls who carried notebooks filled with brilliance no one ever asked to see. She called it quiet brilliance. The nonprofit was her idea, but Marlene helped build the structure. They partnered with educators, recruited black female engineers and mathematicians as mentors, and created a scholarship fund with the damages awarded from the lawsuit. The first program was small, a 3-week summer workshop hosted in a local library conference room. 12 girls attended. All of them had stories of being underestimated. All of them had something to say. Alaya didn't lecture, she listened. She shared. She handed them puzzles she'd designed herself, then watched as they solved them in ways she hadn't considered. By the end of the program, one of the girls, age 10, said, "This is the first time I felt like my brain wasn't too much." That sentence stayed with Alaya longer than any applause. Quiet brilliance expanded quickly. Donations came in. So did volunteers. A viral fundraising campaign brought in enough to cover laptops, books, and transportation for 50 students in the next cohort. Word spread. Students started mailing Alaya letters, some handwritten on lined notebook paper, addressed simply to the girl who did the math. She read every single one. Still, she never lost sight of how fast admiration could morph into interrogation. One afternoon, as Alaya and Marlene were reviewing applications for the fall program, a new email appeared in their shared inbox. The subject line read, "Exclusive offer, Netflix originals." At first, Marlene assumed it was spam. It wasn't. The email came from a development executive who had followed Alaya's story for months. She referenced the viral quote, the courtroom testimony, the nonprofit. Netflix wanted the rights. They envisioned a limited series, one that would trace Alaya's journey from overlooked student to national figure. The tone was reverent, complimentary, promising full creative collaboration. Alaya read it twice, her expression unreadable. Marlene raised an eyebrow. "What do you think?" Alaya was quiet for a long moment. Then, she whispered, "Only if I get to tell the parts that made them uncomfortable." Marlene blinked.
What do you mean?
"I mean, no watered-down characters. No turning it into a feel-good story about one special black girl. No skipping the silence, or the doubt, or the way they looked at you like you forged my thoughts." She picked up her pencil and tapped the eraser against her notebook. "If they want my story," she said softly, "they get all of it." That became her one condition. Not the money, not the credits, not even who would play her. Her only demand, no edits, that made the racism palatable. The room was quiet after that. Not in fear, but in certainty. Marlene reached for her daughter's hand and squeezed it. "I'll make sure they understand," she said. They did. In meetings with producers and screenwriters, Alaya sat with her notebook open, flipping to pages that described the worst days with mathematical analogies. One director suggested adding a fictional teacher who believed in her early on, to give the audience someone to root for. Alaya said no. "I want them to root for the girl who had no one." The development team hesitated. She didn't. In time, they adapted. They realized they weren't crafting a movie. They were following instructions from someone who had built complex systems long before they noticed. Still, Alaya kept her distance from the fame. She declined red carpets. She never joined social media. When reporters reached out for new interviews, she responded with, "Only if we're talking about the nonprofit, not me." She was no longer interested in being the story. She wanted to be the structure. One morning, as she arrived to speak at a youth conference, a teacher stopped her backstage and said, "I've been using your quote to start my class every Monday. It's changed how I see participation." Alaya smiled faintly, then said, "Participation looks different when you stop measuring it by noise." That afternoon, she stood before a room of over 300 girls. Most of them black and brown, all of them gifted in ways that had once gone unseen. She didn't use slides or flashy graphics. She stood at a whiteboard, wrote a simple equation, and turned to the crowd. "This looks like math," she said, "but it's also resistance. It's the language they didn't expect us to speak fluently. So let's get fluent together." The crowd erupted. But Alaya? She just turned back to the board and kept writing. Netflix offered to buy rights to her story, but Alaya had one condition. The offer from Netflix wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a new kind of battle, one not fought in classrooms or courtrooms, but in editing bays and script drafts, where truth could be sliced, reshaped, softened for mass consumption, where real pain